Some folks, they live their whole lives in a house they don't own. They polish the floors, paint the walls, even fix the leaky faucets, believing that their effort buys them security. But come morning, it's still someone else's roof over their head. And the day the owner decides to sell, they're left out in the cold, no matter how much sweat they poured into someone else's foundation. It's a truth whispered in the quiet moments, a shadow that falls over good, honest people who give their best day after day. There was a man who knew that shadow well, though for a long time he only knew it in his bones, not in his mind. Garrett, he was called. 42 years old, with a frame that spoke of honest labor, average, maybe a soft midsection now, but still capable. His hands, though, they were the real storytellers. Thick, calloused palms, knuckles scarred from years of repetitive work on the factory floor, nails often grimed despite his best efforts to scrub them clean. You could see the work in his tired but kind blue eyes, too, deep set beneath a square jaw and rough skin already kissed by the sun. His light brown hair, receding and laced with about 25% gray, was always combed back, a quiet defiance against time. He was the kind of man who'd quietly fix a jammed machine or lend you a wrench without a word, just a nod. He'd seen a lot of changes in that loud, fluorescent-lit place, the smell of grease and metal clinging to everything, even him. His home was a modest, well-maintained single-story out in the suburbs, built back in the 70s, filled with the warmth of his wife Sarah and their two kids, Emily and Jake. He drove an old Ford F-150, a 2008 model with a few dents but an interior always spotless, a testament to his meticulous nature. Money was always just okay. Enough for the bills, enough for the kids' school supplies, maybe a quiet dinner out once a month. But there was never much left over for luxuries, or for those looming emergencies he constantly worried about. He'd trade his time, his strength, his skill for an hourly wage, for benefits, for that steady, predictable paycheck. That's what security felt like to him, a steady pulse in a world of uncertainty. He believed his value was tied to the clock in, clock out, to being a dependable cog in a bigger machine. But deep down, beneath the quiet observance, a fear of stagnation gnawed at him, a silent regret for a future he hadn't yet grasped, kept at bay by a stubborn tendency to settle. He was trading time for money, and while it kept the lights on, it kept him tethered too, watching someone else's ceiling limit his family's dreams. Then came the spring of 23. The whispers had started weeks ago, quiet as mice, about a restructuring. Garrett had heard it all before. But this time it was different. They laid off Frank, a man who'd stood at the next station over for 20 years, a man whose hands were just as scarred, whose stories were just as long. Frank, with a quiet handshake and a box of personal effects, was gone. No warning, no ceremony, just disposable. The harsh fluorescent lights of the factory floor suddenly seemed colder, harsher. Garrett watched Frank leave, and in that moment the illusion of his own security shattered like old glass. He saw his own future flash before his eyes, 20 more years than 30, working until he, too, was just another number, another body to be replaced, without having built anything truly of his own. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, the warm, golden hour light filtering through the window, he looked at Emily, then at Jake, their faces bright with their own innocent futures. He couldn't gamble their lives, their dreams, on someone else's decisions. He just couldn't. From that day on, Garrett wasn't just a worker anymore. He became a man who understood that true security, real wealth, it didn't come from a paycheck, but from ownership. It came from creating value, from seeing problems not as obstacles, but as opportunities waiting for a solution. The grind of the factory floor, once a grim reality, transformed into a blueprint for a future he would forge himself. He traded the perceived comfort of that steady wage for the thrill and responsibility of building something lasting, something his. And in that, he found not just financial freedom, but a profound, undeniable sense of purpose. He'd tell you if you asked him, leaning back in his own comfortable home study, the afternoon sun streaming in. I used to think safe meant a regular paycheck. But safe is building your own damn house, not renting a room in someone else's. You gotta own the problem, then own the solution. That's where real freedom comes from. You know, some folks, they walk through life like they're just punching a clock, waiting for the bell to ring. Garrett, he was one of them for a long, long time. 42 years old, and most days you'd find him on the factory floor, a steady hum of machinery his constant companion. He wasn't a big man, not exactly, about 5'10", 195 pounds, a bit of a soft midsection that had crept up on him over the years. But he moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, every motion precise, honed by decades of repetition under those harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights that painted everything in shades of gray. His face, it told a story all its own. A square jaw perpetually set, holding back whatever thoughts were churning behind those tired, kind blue eyes. His skin was rough, a few sunspots scattered across his cheeks from forgotten summer days, and above his left eyebrow a small, faded scar, a souvenir from a dropped wrench years ago. He kept a neatly trimmed stubble, probably because it saved him a few minutes in the morning. And his hair, well, it was thinning light brown, about a quarter of it gray now, carefully combed back to cover a receding hairline that only he really noticed. But it was his hands that truly spoke volumes. Thick and calloused, palms like sandpaper, knuckles scarred from countless bumps and scrapes against cold metal. Even after a good scrub at the end of a shift, there was often a faint grime tucked beneath his nails, a testament to the work he put in day after day. He was a quiet man, Garrett was, usually kept to himself, observing more than he spoke. But if you needed a hand, truly needed one, he was the first to offer it, no questions asked. He was a dependable rock for those around him, steady as a brick wall. Beneath that quiet exterior, though, a different kind of engine hummed. He carried a deep-seated fear, a gnawing worry about stagnation, about waking up one day and realizing he'd lived a life full of regret. But there was also a quiet hope, a burning ambition for something better, something more for his wife, Sarah, and their kids, Emily, who was 14 going on 20, and Jake, a boisterous 10-year-old. His strength was his resilience, his unwavering sense of responsibility. His flaw, though, that was his overthinking, his tendency to settle for good enough out of fear. That fear of failure, it kept him tethered, planted him firmly in the comfort of what he knew, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet dreams that flickered in the dark corners of his mind. The alarm clock, an old digital affair with numbers glowing a dull red, usually screamed its protest at 4:45 a.m. For Garrett, it was less a protest and more a summons. The room was still cloaked in the deep, muted tones of pre-dawn, a mix of shadowy grays and deep blues like 3A4045. He'd swing his feet out of bed, the worn carpet cool beneath his calloused soles, and stretch his average frame, feeling the familiar aches in his back and shoulders, the residue of yesterday's repetitive motions. Sarah, his wife, would stir faintly beside him, a soft breath in the quiet. He'd lean down, press a quick, tired kiss to her forehead, then pad silently to the kitchen. Coffee, that was the first ritual. The gurgle and hiss of the ancient machine filling the modest, 70s-built home with its earthy aroma. In that brief, silent window before Emily or Jake stirred, Garrett would sit at the kitchen table, running a thumb over the rough skin of his scarred knuckles. He'd scan the bills, the electric, the water, the mortgage statement, all stacked neatly by the sugar jar, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of his thoughts. The numbers were always just a little too close for comfort, leaving no room for luxuries, barely enough for an unexpected repair. Soon enough, the house would wake. Emily, 14 going on 20, would emerge from her room with a sleepy grumble, already scrolling on her phone. Jake, a boisterous 10-year-old, would tear through the living room, energy already at full throttle. Garrett loved them fiercely, that burning ambition for their future a constant ember in his chest. He'd try to engage, offering a quiet morning or a sleep well buddy to Jake, but his mind was often already on the day ahead, the gears grinding. By 5:30 a.m., he was in his truck, a well-worn but meticulously cared-for 2008 Ford F-150. A few dents on the fender, but the interior was spotless, a testament to his innate need for order. The engine rumbled to life, a comforting, familiar sound. He'd back out of the driveway, the truck's headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, joining the slow procession of other vehicles, other men and women heading to their own posts in the working-class suburb. The radio played low, some classic rock station, but Garrett barely heard it. His thoughts were a low, steady drone about schedules, about targets, about making it through another 8 hours. He saw himself in every other tired face in the passing cars, all trading their most precious commodity, time, for money. The factory loomed, a monolithic gray structure against the brightening sky, bathed in the harsh, almost sickly fluorescent light that spilled from its windows. Inside, it was a world of clang and hum, a symphony of machinery and shouted commands. The air was thick with the smell of metal and grease, a smell that had become as familiar as home. Garrett walked the floor, his average build moving with a practiced rhythm. His hands, thick and calloused, nails often grimy despite his best efforts, worked with an almost automated precision. He operated the stamping machine, a beast of metal and force, day in and day out. Load the part, press the button, watch it stamp, unload the part. Repeat, hundreds of times, thousands of times. His small scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from an old accident, seemed to throb in rhythm with the machine's relentless beat. There were small frustrations: a jammed conveyor belt, a supervisor's curt, unthinking remark, a colleague's complaint about the latest efficiency drive. Garrett would nod, offering a quiet, "Yeah, I hear ya," but mostly he kept to himself, observing. During his lunch break, he'd sit in the noisy cafeteria, eating a modest sandwich, his tired blue eyes scanning the room. He saw the same faces, the same exhaustion, the same resignation. The unspoken question in the air was always, how much longer? How much longer until retirement, until something broke, until the routine simply became too much to bear? The gray of the factory floor, the 5A6267 of the machinery, pressed in on him, a constant, dull weight. The money, while okay, was a constant tightrope walk. Sarah would sometimes mention a new pair of shoes for Emily or a weekend trip to the lake, and Garrett would nod slowly, his square jaw tight, muttering, "We'll see, honey. Gotta make sure we cover the basics first." The fear of not having enough, of one day facing a major emergency with an empty bank account, gnawed at him. He knew he was dependable, a rock for his family, but what kind of future could he build for them if he was always limited by someone else's ceiling? He understood his value was tied to his hourly wage, his benefits, to the time he clocked in and out. It felt secure in a way, but also fundamentally unfulfilling, like being a bird in a gilded cage. When the shift finally ended, the transition from the harsh fluorescent factory light to the warm, golden-hour evening light outside felt like shedding a heavy cloak. The drive home was slower, traffic thicker, but the weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten fractionally with each mile. He'd pull the F-150 into his driveway, the worn brick of his modest home a welcome sight. Dinner with Sarah, Emily, and Jake was the anchor of his day. He'd listen to Jake's breathless tales of schoolyard adventures, offer Emily a quiet word about her day, try to connect, despite the deep tiredness settling in his bones. Later, he'd help Jake with a math problem or proofread Emily's history essay, the brief moments of connection a balm to his quiet desperation. After the kids were in bed and Sarah had drifted off beside him, Garrett would often lie awake. The house would be silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. In the darkness, the fear of stagnation, that gnawing regret, would surface. He pictured himself at 60, 65, still walking that factory floor, his body breaking down, waiting for a gold watch and a handshake, only to be replaced by someone younger, cheaper. He worried about layoffs, about the company restructuring, about not having built anything of his own. He was a cog in someone else's machine, exchanging his life for a paycheck, feeling the quiet hope for something more burn in him, a flicker of untapped potential in the dim, introspective shadows of his mind, but always pulling back, tethered by the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown, the deep tiredness settling in his bones. Later, he'd help Jake with a math problem or proofread Emily's history essay, the brief moments of connection a balm to his quiet desperation. After the kids were in bed and Sarah had drifted off beside him, Garrett would often lie awake. The house would be silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. In the darkness, the fear of stagnation, that gnawing regret, would surface. He pictured himself at 60, 65, still walking that factory floor, his body breaking down, waiting for the layoff notice that might come with a handshake and a sorry smile. He often traced the faint scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a dropped wrench years ago, the memory a stark reminder of the physical cost of his labor, of his life traded for a paycheck. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the main assembly hall at Sterling Manufacturing always seemed to vibrate a particular frequency in Garrett's skull, a dull, constant thrum that was as much a part of his day as the metallic tang in the air and the rhythmic clatter of the machines. His hands, thick-palmed and scarred, moved with practiced efficiency, fastening components onto the line. His light brown hair, receding slightly at the temples, was often dampened by sweat despite the ventilation. He kept his head down, focused, but his eyes, tired but observant, took everything in. One Tuesday morning, the hum felt different. It was overlaid by a brittle silence, a nervous energy that crackled through the plant. Garrett saw the plant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man rarely seen outside his glass office, walking the floor with a grin set to his jaw, accompanied by a woman in a severe gray suit no one recognized. Conversations died, heads dipped lower, a collective dread settled. At the 10 a.m. break, the PA system crackled to life, demanding everyone's attention. Effective immediately, Mr. Henderson's voice boomed, amplified, and distorted. "Sterling Manufacturing is undergoing a necessary restructuring. We regret to inform you that several positions are being eliminated." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Garrett felt a knot tighten in his soft midsection. He looked around. Frank, who worked the station next to him, a man with 20 years on the line, a man whose kids were now in college, whose laughter was as much a part of the factory's background noise as the machines themselves, stood still, his normally jocular face pale. The rest of the day crawled. Garrett's usual focus wavered. He watched as names were called one by one to Mr. Henderson's office. Each time the door closed, a little piece of the plant's spirit seemed to dim. Then a few hours later, the office door opened again. It was Frank. Garrett's kind blue eyes followed him. Frank walked out, his shoulders slumped, his lunchbox clutched tight in one of his calloused hands. His stubbled jaw was clenched, his rough skin looking even grayer than usual. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked slowly, deliberately towards the exit, his work boots dragging slightly, each step echoing the finality of it all. He didn't even stop to pick up his coat from the break room hook. Garrett watched him go, a cold, sickening dread washing over him. Frank, 20 years, just like that. Disposable. The word echoed in his mind, chilling him to the bone. He thought of his own 2 decades here, the early mornings, the late nights, the times he'd worked through the flu just to keep the perfect attendance bonus. He de-poured his life into this place, believing in the unspoken promise of security, of loyalty repaid. But that promise had just walked out the door with Frank. His own future, the one he'd always pictured. Retiring from Sterling, maybe a small pension, enough to keep the modest, well-maintained house running. It flashed before his eyes, not as a comfortable landing, but as a cliff edge. He saw himself at 60, his body more worn, perhaps a new scar or 2 on his knuckles, still doing the same repetitive work, just waiting for his turn to be deemed superfluous, redundant, eliminated. He saw the worry etched on Sarah's face, the dreams fading from Emily's and Jake's eyes. It was a mirror reflecting a life he was terrified to live. The drive home in his meticulously cared-for 2008 Ford F-150 was a blur. The familiar dents on the truck's fender seemed to mock him. He pulled into the driveway of his 70s single-story home, the warm, golden hour light filtering through the living room window, a stark contrast to the harsh, fluorescent glow of the factory. He saw Emily through the window, hunched over her homework, Jake's bicycle leaning against the porch railing. He pushed open the front door, the smell of Sarah's cooking filling the air, a familiar comfort that suddenly felt fragile, precarious. He looked at Emily's earnest young face as she wrestled with an algebra problem, then at Jake, absorbed in a drawing on the kitchen table, his brow furrowed in concentration. Their futures, their asterisk futures. He couldn't gamble them on someone else's decisions, on the whims of a boardroom, on a system that saw 20 years of loyalty as nothing more than a line item on a budget spreadsheet. The fear of stagnation, the quiet regret that usually only surfaced in the dead of night, now screamed in his ears, demanding attention. He couldn't just keep settling for good enough out of fear of failure anymore. Something had cracked. Something fundamental had shifted. He stared at his kids, and a burning ambition, fueled by a terrifying, exhilarating hope, ignited deep within him. The dinner table was a blur of activity, the familiar rhythm of family life. Emily chattered about a school project. Jake recounted a daring skateboard stunt that probably wasn't as daring as he made it sound. Garrett nodded, offered a quiet, "That's good, son," or "Sounds interesting, Em." But his mind was miles away, still replaying the hollow sound of Mr. Henderson's name being called into HR. His calloused hand, thick and scarred from years on the line, tightened around his fork. Sarah, ever perceptive, caught his eye across the table. Her brow furrowed slightly. "Everything all right, honey? You seem a bit quiet tonight." He managed a weak smile. "Just a long day, hun, lot on my mind." He pushed the last bite of pot roast around his plate, the warmth of the food a stark contrast to the growing chill in his gut. The fear of stagnation, a quiet hum beneath the surface of his life for so long, had now found its melody, a frantic, insistent drumbeat. Hours later, the house was silent save for the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall. Sarah's soft, even breathing filled the space beside him. But sleep wouldn't come for Garrett. His eyes were wide open, staring at the faint, ghostly square of moonlight on the ceiling above their bed. It was 3 a.m., the hour when truth felt most stark, most unforgiving. He rolled onto his back, the familiar creak of the mattress a lonely sound. His own quiet life, the steady pulse of a factory worker, suddenly felt like a cage. 20 years he'd given his body a testament to the repetitive motions, the thick palms and scarred knuckles proof of his dedication. And for what? For a line item to be erased. Mr. Henderson, a man who'd been on the line longer than Garrett had been married, gone. Just like that. Disposable. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Was that his future? To work until his back gave out, until the company decided a younger, cheaper model was more efficient. He thought of his midsection, a little softer than it used to be, a testament to the easy comforts of a steady, albeit unfulfilling, routine. He had traded his time, his sweat, his very vitality for an hourly wage, for the illusion of security that shattered with a single memo. He was good at his job, dependable, a solid rock, but a rock eroding slowly under someone else's stream. The ceiling blurred. He closed his eyes, picturing Emily's earnest face, the way she dreamed of college, of a life beyond this working-class suburb. Jake, with his boundless energy and his dreams of becoming an inventor. How could he tell them he couldn't provide for those dreams, not truly, not without constant worry? His chest ached with the weight of that responsibility. He had always been a rock, but what if his foundation was built on shifting sand? A deep-seated fear of regret clawed at him. He'd seen it in the older guys at the plant, the quiet resignation in their eyes, the tales of shoulda, woulda, coulda, over lukewarm coffee in the break room. He had always kept to himself, observing, listening, but never truly acting on the flicker of ambition he felt deep down. He'd settled. He'd accepted good enough because the known felt safer than the unknown, because the fear of failure had always outweighed the quiet hope for more. But now, that hope was screaming. It had been ignited by the stark reality of Mr. Henderson's fate, fanned by the sight of his children's faces, and was now a blazing inferno in the quiet darkness of his mind. What if he didn't settle? What if he dared to build something of his own, something that couldn't be taken away by a corporate restructuring? The idea, though vague and terrifying, pulsed with a thrilling energy he hadn't felt in years. It was a dangerous thought, a rebellion against everything he'd ever known. He imagined the quiet hum of his own workshop, not the cacophony of the factory. He pictured problems not as obstacles, but as puzzles he could solve, value he could create. The fear of failure was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a greater fear. The fear of staying the same, of watching his life dwindle, a prisoner in someone else's machine. "I used to think safe meant a regular paycheck," he whispered into the darkness, the words forming silently in his head. "But safe is building your own damn house, not renting a room in someone else's. You gotta own the problem, then own the solution." That's where real freedom comes from. The words weren't his own yet, not really. They were a nascent belief, a seed planted in the fertile soil of his desperation and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. He lay there, listening to the quiet breathing of his wife, the hum of the refrigerator, and the roaring ambition in his soul, knowing that this long night would be the last of its kind. Tomorrow, something had to change. The first sliver of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple, a stark contrast to the sterile gleam of his kitchen. Garrett sat at the chipped formica table, coffee steaming but untouched. His tired blue eyes, usually soft with a quiet resignation, held a new, unfamiliar glint, a stubborn flame lit by the preceding night's revelations. He ran a thick, calloused thumb over the rough skin of his knuckles, scarred from years of gripping wrenches and handling raw materials. Every ache in his fingers, every throb in his lower back, felt suddenly amplified, a physical tally of the years he'd traded away, piece by painful piece. Sarah moved about the kitchen, her gentle hum a familiar soundtrack to their mornings. She paused beside him, her hand brushing his thinning hair as she reached for the cereal box. He leaned into her touch, a silent anchor in the whirlwind of his thoughts. Emily's sleepy groan echoed from her room, followed by Jake's more boisterous shuffling. Their futures, so fragile and dependent, weighed on him, a heavy yet galvanizing force. He looked at the modest house, its 70s charm worn but well-maintained, and saw not a home but a trap built around the precarious structure of his hourly wage. The drive to the factory that morning felt different. The familiar hum of his Ford F-150, its dents a testament to years of reliable service, usually lulled him into a routine trance. But today, the route felt like a tunnel, narrowing, constricting. He gripped the steering wheel, his scarred knuckles white, and for the first time truly saw the monotony of the path. The same signs, the same potholes, the same gray buildings looming in the pre-dawn gloom. He remembered the look on poor old Frank's face, 20 years of his life summarily dismissed with a stapled severance packet. That could have been him, would * be him eventually. The thought was a bitter bile in his throat. Parking the truck, a ritual he'd performed thousands of times, felt like laying down his last card. He stared at the imposing facade of the plant, the harsh fluorescent light already spilling from its windows, promising another day of repetitive tasks. A deep breath filled his lungs, tasting metallic and cold. He wasn't sure what he would do, not yet. He had no grand plan, no secret savings, no entrepreneurial epiphany, just a raw, undeniable conviction. Enough. He whispered the single word hanging in the crisp morning air, swallowed by the distant rumble of machinery. It wasn't a shout of defiance or a dramatic declaration. It was a quiet, resolute settling in his soul, a definitive closing of a chapter. The weight of that choice, the enormity of stepping into the terrifying unknown, pressed down on him, making his chest ache. It was a decision made not out of recklessness, but out of a profound, quiet desperation to be free. He knew with an unwavering certainty that whatever fear of failure had held him back before, it was nothing compared to the slow, agonizing death of regret. He wouldn't let his story end there, not in that factory, not for his family. He just could. He moved through the factory that day like a ghost, his body performing the familiar dance with machinery, but his mind light years away. The rhythmic clanking and whirring, usually a comforting thrum against the relentless march of the clock, now felt like a giant metal heartbeat counting down his remaining years. He saw his colleagues, their faces etched with the same weariness he knew so well, and he wondered if they, too, felt the quiet despair of being trapped, or if they simply accepted it as the natural order of things. He wasn't just looking at the products anymore. He was looking at the asterisk process asterisk, at the asterisk problems, at the value being created, and more importantly, the value he wasn't creating for himself. That evening, the warm glow of his modest home felt both like a refuge and a challenge. Sarah met him with a gentle smile, the scent of her homemade lasagna a rich invitation to simply be. Emily was hunched over her school books at the kitchen table, Jake engrossed in a game, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the day's factory drone. For a moment, the pull of the familiar was overwhelming. His body ached, his blue eyes were gritty from the harsh fluorescent light, and the worn armchair in the living room seemed to beckon with a promise of oblivion. It would have been so easy to settle, to just let the day's quiet revolution fade into the comfortable hum of family life, to tell himself it was just a fleeting thought. But as he sat down to dinner, his gaze drifted to the framed photos on the shelf. Sarah's radiant smile, Emily's gap-toothed grin as a toddler, Jake's mischievous eyes. And then the image of George, his colleague of 20 years, walking out with that cardboard box, resurfaced like a phantom limb ache. That wasn't just George's future he'd seen. It was his own, playing out in stark, terrifying clarity. The quiet voice of fear, usually so good at convincing him to stay put, was now overshadowed by a burning ambition. Not for glory or riches, but for something solid, something his. You can't gamble their future on someone else's decisions, the words echoed, a low, steady drumbeat in his chest. Instead of collapsing onto the couch after the kids were in bed, he found himself at the kitchen table, the lingering smell of garlic and tomato filling the air. He pulled out a worn yellow legal pad and a stubby pencil, his calloused hands feeling strangely clumsy with such delicate tools. What did he no asterisk? What problems did he see around him that people struggled with? He wasn't a financial wizard or a tech guru. He was a man who understood how things worked, how they broke, and how to fix them. His mind wandered through his own working-class suburb, Mrs. Henderson's perennial leaky faucet, Old Man Peterson's garden gate that always sagged. The countless times neighbors had called him, not just for a favor, but because they trusted his quiet competence. He started making a list, his pencil scratching softly against the paper. Not grand, world-changing ideas, but small, tangible needs. Leaky pipes, faulty light switches, squeaky doors, fence repairs, minor drywall patches. Things that often cost a fortune to hire a specialized contractor for, but were too much for the average homeowner to tackle themselves. He thought about his own F-150, well-maintained and dependable. He started making a list, his pencil scratching softly against the paper. Not grand, world-changing ideas, but small, tangible needs. It wasn't much, but it could haul tools. It could haul him. The first few days were a blur of nervous energy. He cleaned out his garage, organizing his tools with a meticulousness born of years on the factory floor. He spent hours researching small business licenses, insurance, and pricing, his brow furrowed in concentration under the dim glow of his work light. Sarah watched him, a mix of apprehension and quiet support in her eyes. Emily and Jake, well, they mostly just wondered why Dad wasn't quite as quiet as usual and why he kept muttering about overhead and value proposition. But then came day 3. The initial adrenaline, that surge of defiant hope, it started to ebb. The factory, with its predictable rhythm and its fluorescent hum, felt like a distant, almost comforting memory. His hand, so used to the heavy wrench or the vibrating sander, felt a bit lost without a fixed task. He'd spent the morning making flyers on his ancient home computer, simple things, just his name, a list of services, and his phone number. Nothing fancy, just honest. He drove the F-150, a small stack of these flyers on the passenger seat, heading for the subdivision across town, one a little nicer than his own, where people likely had more disposable income. He'd planned to stick them in mailboxes, maybe even knock on a few doors. But parked at the curb, engine idling, he found his palms sweating. He gripped the steering wheel, his calloused knuckles white. "Just go on, Garrett," he muttered to himself, his voice sounding thin in the cab. "Just stick one in a mailbox, it ain't a big deal." He reached for a flyer, then hesitated. What if someone saw him? What if they thought he was some kind of desperado? His mind, usually so practical, began to spin with anxieties. What if I mess up a job? What if I get sued? What if I just look foolish? The old fear of failure, the one that kept him settling for good enough, gnawed at him. He saw the comfortable porch swing on the house ahead, the manicured lawn, and suddenly his little flyer felt utterly inadequate. A pang of self-doubt, sharp and unwelcome, twisted in his gut. He was a factory worker, not some kind of entrepreneur. He could always go back. There were always openings at the plant. He could always just be asterisk safe. He sat there for a long time, the engine humming a quiet, insistent tune. The harsh mid-morning sun glinted off the windshield, making him squint. The comfortable hum of the factory, the easy predictability of a paycheck, it called to him. It was a siren song promising security. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he saw Mr. Henderson's face, pale and bewildered, clutching his severance package. He saw Emily's hopeful gaze when he talked vaguely about new possibilities. He saw Jake always drawing pictures of fantastical machines, utterly trusting his dad to provide. "Nah," he sighed, the word a quiet refusal. "Not this time." He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with the smell of old coffee and truck upholstery. He got out of the F-150, his movements deliberate, and walked up to the first mailbox. His hand trembled just a bit as he tucked the flyer inside. Then the next and the next. No one came out. No dogs barked. He didn't talk to a soul. It wasn't glorious, but he didn't quit. He had pushed past the initial wall of self-doubt just by doing. Day 7 brought a different kind of pressure. The silence from potential customers was deafening. He'd put out maybe 50 flyers, posted on a local online community board, even told a few neighbors what he was trying to do. And still nothing. Not a single call. The financial reality of zero income began to sink its teeth in. He'd always had his paycheck direct deposited every 2 weeks, reliable as the sunrise. Now his bank account felt like a slowly draining bathtub. He avoided checking the balance, but he could feel the numbers shrinking. That evening, over a dinner of spaghetti, Sarah finally voiced her worries. "Garrett," she began, her voice soft but firm, "are you sure about this? The plant called, you know. They're looking for someone to cover the night shift for a bit. It wouldn't be full-time, but it would be asterisk something." He looked at her, then at Emily, engrossed in her phone, and Jake, trying to build a tower of meatballs on his fork. The idea of going back, even for a few shifts, was tempting. A familiar routine, familiar faces, and most importantly, familiar money. He could just work the nights, keep trying to build his business during the day. It felt like a reasonable compromise, a safe way to hedge his bets. He chewed slowly, tasting the blandness of his fear. "Yeah, I know, hun," he said, choosing his words carefully, his gaze drifting to the window, where the last light of the day painted the sky in warm oranges and purples. "But I told you I gotta build something of my own. If I go back even for a little while, it's too easy to stay. It's too easy to get comfortable again. And then what? 20 years from now, I'm still wishing I'd tried." He got up after dinner, leaving his plate unfinished, and walked out to the garage. He stared at his organized tools, the clean workbench. He picked up a pipe wrench, turning it over in his hands. It felt solid, dependable. But the wrench didn't make the decisions, he did. He knew he was still thinking like an employee, seeing the job, the task asterisk, as the primary thing. What he needed was to think like an owner, to see the asterisk problem and build the asterisk solution. The phone finally rang on day 8. It was Mrs. Henderson from 2 streets over, the one whose leaky faucet he'd mentally added to his list. "Garrett," she said, her voice a little breathless. "I heard your..." Well, doing odd jobs now? My faucet, it's just gotten worse. And that handyman I usually use, he's booked for weeks. His heart hammered in his chest. His first official job. He quoted her a price, a bit low, but he just wanted to get his foot in the door. He spent the better part of 3 hours fixing that faucet, wrestling with rusted pipes under the sink, his hands aching, his stubble catching drips of water. When he finally tightened the last fitting and the steady stream of water came out without a single drip misses, Henderson smiled, a genuine, grateful smile. She paid him in cash, $20 bills crisp in his calloused palm. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fortune. It was asterisk his. By day 14, the initial trickle of jobs had become a slow but steady stream. He'd fixed old Mr. Peterson's garden gate. Turned out it just needed a new hinge and some shims. He'd patched a hole in a neighbor's drywall. He was working hard, harder even than at the factory, and for less money, at least for now. He was constantly driving, quoting, doing, learning. He was exhausted, his body aching from working in awkward spaces, his mind buzzing with what he needed to do next. The real test came when a prospective customer, a stern man with an immaculate lawn, questioned his price for fixing a rotting deck rail. "That seems a bit high, son," he'd said, looking Garrett up and down, his gaze lingering on Garrett's work boots and the faint grease stain on his shirt. "You got a license? Insurance?" "I usually go with a bigger company." Garrett felt the familiar prickle of insecurity. He hadn't yet formalized his business entirely, still working on the small-time paperwork. He stood there trying to find the words, feeling like that kid on day 3 clutching his flyers. He felt small. He felt like a fraud. He almost crumbled, almost offered to do it for half price just to get the job. But then he straightened his shoulders, remembering the quiet resolve that had pushed him out of the truck that first day. He remembered Mr. Henderson, the empty future that had flashed before his eyes. He thought of his kids and the promise he'd made to them, to himself. "Sir," Garrett said, his voice slow and deliberate, choosing his words carefully, "I might not be the biggest company around, no. But I guarantee my work, and I'll tell you this, I'm building something here, something honest, and when I build it to last. Your deck rail will be solid, stronger than it was before." He paused, looking the man directly in the eye, that flicker of untapped potential now burning a little brighter. "You hire a big company, you get a guy they send. You hire me, you get me? I'm the owner, I'm responsible." The man stared at him for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "All right, son," he said, extending a hand. "You got the job." That handshake felt different. It wasn't a supervisor handing him a work order. It wasn't a pay stub appearing in his account. It was a commitment, a trust. It was the thrill and the responsibility of building something lasting. He wasn't just fixing a deck rail. He was building his own house, brick